And I put this video together for a particular student of mine who said to me, Paula, I am sick of hearing people tell me to write shorter sentences. That really cannot be all there is to brevity. And of course, my student is 100% right. There's a lot more to brevity than just write short sentences. Now, that doesn't mean that the write short sentences advice is necessarily bad advice. In law, however, not all our sentences can be that short, and that's because of the complexity of what we're writing sometimes. But in general, it is a good idea to try to keep our sentences short in English. But there are other things that we can also do to really help us write more briefly. And so today I want to give you 5 ideas, 5 tips that you can implement in your writing to achieve that brevity and to go beyond just thinking about it as write shorter sentences. Hi there, I'm Paula Clammer. I'm a lawyer, translator, and legal English coach. And for the past 20 years, I've worked at the intersection between law and language, helping global professionals to communicate effectively in English as a second or foreign language. And today I put together a video on brevity in legal writing. Use short words. And I know what you might be thinking. You might be thinking, oh my gosh, she is going to dumb it down. This is part of that plain language thing where it sounds like we're dumbing it down for the readers because we're underestimating our readers, etc., etc. I've heard all those objections. But no, that's not the reason why I am recommending that you use short words. There's actually research into memory and retention as we are reading. And it has been demonstrated that short words are actually easier for readers to retain. And so if you're writing something in law that is quite complex and that understanding it is going to require that your reader retain a significant amount of information that you're presenting to that reader, then using short words actually helps your reader to be able to do that, to retain the information that they need so that they can follow your analysis or follow your argument from beginning to end. So what we're trying to achieve here is the opposite of dumbing it down for the reader. We want to make sure that our reader can really remember what they need to remember so that we can ensure that comprehension that we need from the reader in our legal piece. And so really it's all about when you're given a choice between long words and short words, just go for the short one. Between acquire, purchase, and buy, we'll go with buy. Between question, interrogate, and ask, go with ask. Now, a second objection that comes up a lot when we talk about short words in English is that these words are less formal. There's a misconception in the legal English world that somehow short words mean that we're being informal in our writing, but that's not true at all. Register in English, which is really how we measure formality, isn't about whether we're using long words or short words. It's actually about how we're combining the words that we are using. And so ask is not less formal than question or interrogate. Buy is not less formal than purchase or acquire. What's going to make it less formal in context is how you construct the sentence where you're using that word. And so really you have a lot more control over formality regardless of how long the word is. When you have non-essential information, if you absolutely must include that information, then do it as a footnote whenever you can. And notice there were 2 caveats there. There was if you absolutely must include that information. I'm a big fan of just cutting out unnecessary information. If the information doesn't really add anything to your main point, I don't see why we should keep it in the first place. And I always encourage my students to get rid of all the information that's unnecessary and that can potentially distract your reader from your argument or your analysis. However, there are some authors who really like to include this unnecessary information because they think, well, what if the reader would want to know this? I can save them the trouble of having to research it on their own. It's not likely most of the time, but if you're one of those people who feel like unnecessary but interesting information should be there, then use footnotes. And of course, you can't always do that. There are some kinds of legal writing where we can't do footnotes. And in that case, then if it's not 100% necessary information, then I don't really think you have a choice other than just get rid of it altogether. But let me give you an example of unnecessary information that if you must include it, then include it in a footnote. And if you can't get rid of it, then just get rid of it because it adds nothing. So the example goes like this. Vermont stands out as the first to legislatively pass legislation. We'll talk about that in a different video. However, its law, effective July 1st, 2018, delayed legal sales. And of course, this bit about the fact that the law was effective July 1st, 2018, doesn't really add anything to the point. The point here is just that Vermont was the first one to pass legislation and that the law delayed legal sales of whatever it is that the author is talking about. So that piece of information, effective July 1st, 2018, something you could easily get rid of if you absolutely are too attached to it and you don't want to get rid of it, then turn it into a footnote. But do not make it part of your main text, because in the main text, all it's achieving is that it's distracting your reader. It's forcing your reader to have to go back, reread, and cut it out themselves when they do the rereading. And believe me, if your reader is paying attention, they will absolutely do that. Is cut out unnecessary words. And before I talked about unnecessary pieces of information, now I'm talking about words that add no information, that add nothing of value to the text at all. They're just there, they're making it clunky, and they're really not communicating anything of any value to your writing. And so let me give you an example. This one goes like this. The memorandum is intended, based on the legally significant facts of the case, to determine what law may apply to the contract. Now, if I had the author in front of me right now, I would ask this author, well, if it's a memorandum, what other facts would you base yourself on other than the legally significant ones? If you're writing a memo, well, of course you're basing yourself on the legally significant facts. Legally insignificant facts shouldn't be part of your memo in the first place. So what possible value could there be in clarifying this? This is overkill. And this is what we want to avoid. This is really unnecessary words. These words are just there for the sake of adding words. Who knows why? So don't do that. When you're writing, ask yourself, what is the point of all these extra words that I've added here? Does it add communicational value? Am I communicating anything of importance? Does this help my point at all? If the answer is no, then those words need to get out of there. Another example, these regulations also address issues such as taxation, quality control, and social equity considerations. And so my question to the author here would be, well, are they issues or are they considerations? Are they both? Are they neither? What is the point of calling them both issues and also calling them considerations? And in either case, do either of these words add any communicational value? Wouldn't this sentence be clearer and easier to understand and say the exact same thing, just in more reader-friendly terms, if it said, these regulations also address taxation, quality control, and social equity? We're saying the same thing. We're just cutting out all these words that add noise, but no communication. avoid unnecessary subordinated clauses. And now, if you don't know what subordinated clauses are, that's okay. We don't have to go deep into a grammatical analysis here. Just think of them as mini sentences inside bigger sentences. That's all the information you need to really, once I give you the example, understand what could be cut out of the example that we're looking at. And what I do think is important to clarify is that subordinated clauses are very common among speakers of certain languages more than other languages. And this is particularly true of people whose mother tongue is a Romance language. So if you speak a Romance language like French or Italian or Spanish, there's a good chance that this is one of your L1 interferences. And so I want you to be really aware of it. And if you don't know what L1 interferences are, L1 stands for language 1, which is your mother tongue. And L1 interferences is when your mother tongue kind of creeps in and takes over, and your words are in English, but there's something off about the way that you're using those words, and it kind of breaks down the communication a little bit. I have a whole video on L1 interferences that I recommend that you watch. I also have a blog post on language 1 interferences that will add a little bit more clarity about what these are. But for now, and just to understand where we're going today with this, all you need to know is that if your mother tongue is a Romance language, this might be an L1 for you. So just pay attention to that, check it out, just check your own writing and see if you use a lot of subordinated clauses. And if you do, try to start to get rid of them. And so let me give you this example. And I want you to bear with me here because this is a 100, and this is not a joke, this is a 117 word sentence. So it's just one sentence with 117 words and a bunch of subordinated clauses in it. So here goes. But by setting that high standard of expropriation of shares, and not the total of the company, but a certain number of shares, those that give control, the law expressed that we were going to carry out a bloody process, as the expropriation process, cruel for any private law that is in front of it, trying to sustain the activity of this company in the private framework so that it continues to be a publicly traded company with the highest world standards, and so that in addition to being managed by Colombian hands and Colombian interests, it has the possibility for the private sector to create and contribute to that investment and to that growth. Now, I'm not going to repeat it because it's very long. It's 117 words. I told you that at the very beginning. But if you just heard that and you're kind of scratching your head going, what? That's exactly how I felt. Exactly how pretty much anyone who saw this sentence in writing felt. And the reason is these subordinated clauses, there's so many of them that first, it's unclear where the author is going in the first place. Like, I had to read it several times over and over again before I realized what they were trying to say. And that is never something that your reader should have to do when they're reading you. Your goal as a legal writer is to be effective enough in the communication so that a reader only has to read you once. Avoid qualifiers, especially in neutral legal texts like memos. So when we're trying to be neutral, and there are times in law when we are trying to be neutral, and memos are the best example of the kind of legal writing we do where neutrality is a plus, qualifiers don't really help with neutrality. And what I mean by qualifiers are words like quite, very, pretty, really. These are qualifiers, and they get in the way of neutrality. They just make us seem like we're taking sides. And while that's fine when we're presenting an argument in a brief, it's not fine when we're writing any kind of text where the reader's expectation is that we remain very neutral and objective. One thing I've found in my 20 years working in the law and language field is that there are 3 qualifiers that most speakers of English as a second or foreign language think they're using correctly, but rarely ever do. And so these qualifiers come up a lot in writing. I see them all the time, but I have only seen them used correctly very few times. And it's not obvious what they are. They're indeed, virtually, and clearly. And so I want to encourage you, especially if you're trying to remain neutral, to just cut those out of your writing. And so just to recap my 5 tips for today: short words, footnotes if you must, cut out all unnecessary words that don't add any communicational value, avoid using subordinated clauses, and avoid unnecessary qualifiers. I hope you found these tips very helpful. I want to thank you for taking the time to watch this video. If you want to learn more from me, you can subscribe to my free weekly newsletter where I give a lot of tips and tricks about legal English, and you can find that at paulaclammer.com/newsletter. And if you would like to learn more about memo writing, since I mentioned memos in this particular video, you can also download my free PDF on memo writing, also from my webpage. I will also drop the link wherever you're seeing this video. In the meantime, I want to say thank you again for sticking with me in this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope you learned something new, that you put this stuff into use, and that you continue to practice and learn your legal English.